The champagne felt sticky on my dress, a cruel reminder of the celebration that had just ended. But the real sting was the laughter echoing in my ears, bouncing off the walls of my brother's newly acquired penthouse. They thought they had broken me, stripped me bare. They thought Claire was nothing. But beneath the surface, a storm was brewing, a promise whispered in the silence: they would pay. If you have a sister who's always been there for you, subscribe now. My brother Ethan had always been the golden child. Straight A's, Ivy League education, the fast track to success in the family business. I, on the other hand, had taken a different path. College wasn't for me, the structured environment felt stifling, the curriculum irrelevant to the real-world skills I craved. Instead, I threw myself into the chaotic world of startups, learning by doing, failing fast, and iterating relentlessly. While Ethan was climbing the corporate ladder, I was building my own empire, brick by painful brick, far from the gilded cage of our family's expectations. But to them, to my parents, to Ethan himself, my choices were a disappointment, a constant source of thinly veiled disapproval. The promotion party was supposed to be a truce, a chance to bridge the gap between our disparate lives. I had even flown in from New York, swallowing my pride and the unspoken judgment I knew awaited me. I dressed up, put on my best smile, and prepared to celebrate Ethan's success, hoping for a moment of genuine connection. But the olive branch I offered was met with a slap in the face, served with a side of condescending pity. The evening had started predictably enough. Polite greetings, awkward small talk, the clinking of glasses against a backdrop of forced smiles. I tried to steer the conversation towards my own work, sharing snippets of my latest project, a tech startup focused on sustainable energy solutions. But my words seemed to bounce off them unheard, unheeded. My father patted my hand, a gesture that felt more dismissive than affectionate. "That's nice, dear," he said, his eyes already drifting towards a group of Ethan's colleagues. "But when are you going to get a real job? Something with stability, something with benefits?" My mother chimed in, her voice laced with a familiar blend of concern and disappointment. "We just want what's best for you, Claire. It's not too late to go back to school, get a proper education." Ethan, standing beside them, nodded in agreement, his expression smug. "You know, Claire," he said, his voice carrying a patronizing tone, "it's not too late to turn things around. You could even join the company. I could put in a good word for you." The offer hung in the air, dripping with insincerity. It wasn't an invitation, it was a declaration of my inferiority, a reminder that in their eyes I would always be the underachiever, the black sheep of the family. I forced a smile, masking the anger that was beginning to simmer beneath the surface. "Thanks, but no thanks," I said, my voice carefully controlled. "I'm happy with what I'm doing." The conversation drifted on, punctuated by the hollow laughter and self-congratulatory pronouncements that seemed to fill every corner of the room. I felt increasingly isolated, a stranger in my own family, an outsider looking in on a world that had never truly accepted me. Then came the speech. Ethan, standing on a makeshift stage, a glass of champagne in his hand, began to address the crowd. He thanked his colleagues, his boss, his mentors, his parents, and then he turned to me. "And of course," he said, his voice amplified by the microphone, "I can't forget my sister, Claire." A ripple of polite applause spread through the room. "She's always been different," he continued, his words dripping with sarcasm. "While I was studying hard, acing exams, she was doing something, we never quite knew what." The laughter started subtly, a few scattered chuckles, but it quickly grew into a roar as Ethan continued his demeaning tirade. He mocked my lack of a degree, my unconventional career choices, my pie-in-the-sky dreams. He painted me as a failure, a cautionary tale, a source of amusement for his sophisticated friends. "She thinks she's going to change the world," he said, his voice dripping with scorn. "But let's be honest, she's probably just going to end up broke and alone." The laughter was deafening now, a wave of sound that crashed over me, washing away the last vestiges of hope. My face burned with shame, my heart pounded in my chest, and my hands trembled with barely contained rage. I wanted to disappear, to sink into the floor and never be seen again. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to shatter the carefully constructed facade of their perfect little world. But I did none of those things. I simply stood there, frozen in place, as the laughter continued to echo around me. Then Ethan said the words that would forever alter the course of our relationship. "You see," he said, leaning into the microphone, his eyes fixed on me, "Claire thinks she's so smart, so independent, but the truth is she's uneducated and worthless." The words hung in the air, sharp and cruel, a public declaration of my perceived inadequacy. The laughter reached a fever pitch, fueled by the alcohol and the shared sense of superiority. My vision blurred, my ears rang, and my carefully constructed composure finally shattered. I turned and walked away, my head held high, my back ramrod straight. I walked out of the penthouse, out of the party, out of their lives. I walked away forever. The person I trusted most was one of them. The city lights blurred into streaks of color as the taxi sped away from Ethan's building. Each street lamp was a fresh stab of humiliation. I felt raw, exposed, like a wounded animal desperately seeking shelter. My phone buzzed incessantly, a constant barrage of texts and calls from my parents and Ethan, their hollow apologies ringing false in my ears. I silenced the device, wanting nothing more than to disappear, to sever all ties with the people who had caused me so much pain. I checked into a small, anonymous hotel, a world away from the glittering penthouse where my life had just imploded. The room was sterile and impersonal, but it offered a temporary sanctuary, a place to lick my wounds and gather my thoughts. Sleep evaded me. I tossed and turned, the echoes of Ethan's cruel words reverberating in my mind. Each taunt, each jeer played on repeat, amplifying my insecurities and fueling my rage. The injustice of it all was a burning ember in my chest, refusing to be extinguished. I had worked tirelessly to build my own success, to carve out a space for myself in a world that often felt hostile and unforgiving. And yet my achievements were dismissed, my ambitions ridiculed, my very worth questioned by the people who were supposed to love and support me unconditionally. The sleepless nights bled into blurry days. I couldn't eat, couldn't focus, couldn't shake the feeling of utter devastation. My business, once my source of pride and purpose, now felt like a distant, unattainable dream. How could I possibly lead a team, inspire innovation, and tackle complex challenges when my own foundation had been so brutally shattered? I tried to reach out to friends to seek solace in their understanding and support, but even those conversations felt strained, tainted by the weight of my shame. I couldn't bring myself to fully explain what had happened, to expose the depths of my humiliation. The fear of judgment, of pity, was too overwhelming. I was trapped in a self-imposed prison of silence, isolated and alone with my pain. Driven by a desperate need to reclaim some semblance of control, I decided to confront Ethan directly. I knew it was probably a mistake, a futile attempt to reason with someone who seemed incapable of empathy or understanding, but I couldn't bear the thought of letting his words stand unchallenged. I needed to look him in the eye and demand an explanation, to force him to acknowledge the pain he had inflicted. I called his office, steeling myself for another round of condescension and dismissiveness. To my surprise, he agreed to meet me for lunch. I chose a public place, a bustling cafe where we couldn't possibly reenact the cruelty of the party. When Ethan arrived, he was all smiles and false contrition, his eyes betraying the same smug satisfaction I had seen at the penthouse. He apologized for his insensitive remarks, claiming that he had been drunk and under pressure, that he hadn't meant to hurt me. The words were hollow, rehearsed, devoid of genuine remorse. I pressed him, demanding to know why he felt the need to humiliate me in front of his friends and colleagues. His smile faltered, his facade began to crack, and the truth seeped through. He admitted that he had always been jealous of me, of my independence, my creativity, my willingness to take risks. He confessed that he resented my rejection of the family business, my refusal to conform to their expectations. My success was a constant reminder of his own perceived limitations. The truth was a punch to the gut. My brother, my own flesh and crimson, wasn't proud of me, he resented me. The meeting only deepened the wound. Ethan's explanation, rather than offering closure, only served to amplify my pain and resentment. I realized that there was no repairing our relationship, no bridging the gap between our disparate worlds. The chasm was too wide, the damage too profound. I returned to New York, my spirit crushed, my dreams tarnished. I threw myself into my work, pouring every ounce of my energy into the startup, determined to prove Ethan and my parents wrong. But the weight of their disapproval, the sting of their betrayal, continued to haunt me. I found myself second-guessing my decisions, doubting my abilities, questioning my worth. The once unwavering confidence that had propelled me forward was now replaced by a gnawing sense of insecurity. The business began to suffer, my focus wavered, my passion waned, and my team started to lose faith. The pressure mounted, the stakes grew higher, and the fear of failure became all-consuming. One particularly difficult day, after a series of setbacks and disappointments, I received an email from my father. He had heard about the struggles my company was facing and offered me a loan, a thinly veiled attempt to exert control over my life. The email was the final straw. The humiliation, the resentment, the years of pent-up anger finally boiled over. I realized that I couldn't continue down this path, that I couldn't allow their negativity to dictate my future. I needed to find a way to reclaim my power, to silence their judgment, to prove them wrong once and for all. And that's when the idea of revenge began to take shape. The email felt like a physical blow, my breath hitched and the room seemed to spin. I gripped the edge of my desk, knuckles white, trying to anchor myself to reality. The words swam before my eyes, each syllable a fresh wave of nausea. Alone, it wasn't alone, it was a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman, attached to a chain that would drag me down into the depths. It was an admission of my failure, a confirmation of their judgment, a final, crushing blow to my already fragile self-esteem. I wanted to scream, to shatter the computer screen, to unleash the torrent of rage and frustration that had been building inside me for months. But I couldn't. I was paralyzed, trapped in a cage of my own making, suffocated by the weight of their expectations and my own self-doubt. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and tried to regain control. But the darkness was closing in, threatening to consume me whole. The next few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights, missed deadlines, and increasingly desperate attempts to salvage my failing business. I worked myself to the bone, fueled by caffeine and sheer desperation, but it was no use. The more I struggled, the deeper I sank. The market shifted, investors pulled out, and my team began to crumble. The dream that had once burned so brightly was now flickering, threatening to extinguish altogether. One evening, after a particularly disastrous meeting with a potential investor, I found myself standing on the edge of my building's roof, staring out at the city lights. The wind whipped around me, tugging at my clothes, whispering insidious suggestions in my ear. The city stretched out below, a glittering tapestry of opportunity and despair. For a moment, I felt a strange sense of peace, a surrender to the inevitable. It would be so easy, I thought, to just let go, to release myself from the pain and the pressure, to silence the voices that haunted me. The darkness beckoned, promising oblivion. But then a flicker of defiance sparked within me. A memory surfaced, unbidden, of my grandmother, a woman of fierce independence and unwavering resolve. She had faced countless hardships in her life, but she had never given up, never surrendered to despair. She had taught me the importance of resilience, of fighting for what you believe in, of never letting anyone dim your light. And in that moment, standing on the edge of the abyss, I knew that I couldn't give up. I couldn't let Ethan and my parents win. I couldn't let their negativity define me. I stepped back from the edge, my heart pounding, my breath ragged. The darkness receded, replaced by a faint glimmer of hope. I wouldn't let them break me, I wouldn't let them steal my dreams, I would fight back, I would reclaim my power. The thought of revenge, which had been simmering beneath the surface for weeks, now crystallized into a concrete plan. It wouldn't be quick, it wouldn't be easy, but it would be thorough. I would use their own arrogance, their own weaknesses against them. I would expose their hypocrisy, their lies, their carefully constructed facade of perfection. I would make them pay for what they had done to me. I went back to my apartment, my mind racing, my blood pumping with a newfound sense of purpose. I started to research, to gather information, to identify their vulnerabilities. I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed allies, people I could trust, people who had been wronged by them in the past. I reached out to a former employee of Ethan's, a woman who had been unjustly fired after blowing the whistle on some shady accounting practices. I contacted a disgruntled investor who had been swindled out of his money by my father. I began to build my network piece by piece, carefully selecting each member for their skills, their resources, and their shared desire for retribution. The anger didn't disappear, but it was no longer a destructive force. It became a tool, a weapon, a source of fuel for my plan. I smiled, I acted broken, but I was recording everything. They thought they had silenced me, but they were wrong. They had awakened a sleeping giant. They had underestimated my resolve. They had made a grave mistake, and they were about to pay the price. The day they tried to end me was the day revenge was born. I smiled, a genuine smile, for the first time in what felt like forever. They thought they'd broken me, relegated me to the role of the black sheep, the failure. They believed they had total control, but they were so wrong. My plan started with meticulous research. I dove deep into the underbelly of their empire, their company, their lives. I spent hours scouring public records, legal documents, and social media, piecing together a comprehensive picture of their wrongdoings. Every late night, every shred of evidence uncovered fueled my resolve. I started small, focusing on Ethan's business dealings. It didn't take long to find inconsistencies, shady transactions, and outright falsehoods. He'd been cooking the books for years, inflating profits and hiding losses to impress investors and secure bonuses. I compiled everything, every email, every spreadsheet, every recorded conversation, and built a watertight case. Then came my father. He was more careful, more discreet, but no less corrupt. His sins were buried deeper, concealed behind layers of legal jargon and offshore accounts. But I was patient. I tracked the money, followed the paper trail, and slowly unraveled his web of deceit. It was like watching a house of cards collapse. I needed proof, undeniable proof that would stand up in court and in the court of public opinion. I invested in surveillance equipment, hidden cameras, and sophisticated recording devices. I became a shadow, watching their every move, listening to their every conversation, documenting their every transgression. It was risky, dangerous even, but the potential reward was worth it. I worked closely with my new allies, the former employee and the disgruntled investor, sharing information, strategizing, and coordinating our efforts. We were a team, united by our shared sense of injustice and our determination to see them brought to justice. There were close calls, moments when I thought I'd been discovered, when their suspicions were aroused. One evening, while I was planting a listening device in Ethan's office, he returned unexpectedly. I dove under his desk, heart pounding, barely managing to avoid detection. I could hear him packing above me, talking on the phone, oblivious to my presence. The minutes stretched into an eternity. When he finally left, I scrambled out, my hands shaking, my clothes soaked in sweat. Another time, my father's security team noticed unusual activity around my apartment. They increased their patrols, installed additional cameras, and began monitoring my movements. I had to be extra careful to disguise my activities to avoid raising any further suspicion. I started using encrypted communication channels, burner phones, and secure cloud storage to protect my data and my communications. I knew they were watching me, trying to anticipate my next move, but I was always one step ahead. I made sure to maintain the image of a broken woman, someone who was still struggling to cope with the fallout from their betrayal. I attended therapy sessions, confided in friends, and posted about my emotional struggles on social media. I wanted them to believe that I was still vulnerable, still defeated, still under their control. But beneath the surface, I was plotting, scheming, and preparing to unleash my carefully orchestrated plan. Their biggest weakness, they thought they were untouchable. The weeks turned into months. The tension mounted. The anticipation became almost unbearable. I knew the strike had to be perfectly timed, precisely executed. I needed to gather all the evidence, secure all the necessary resources, and coordinate all the moving parts. I consulted with lawyers, forensic accountants, and media experts to ensure that my plan was legally sound and strategically effective. I wanted to maximize the impact, to inflict the greatest possible damage on their reputations, their careers, and their financial holdings. I also took steps to protect myself, to shield myself from any potential backlash. I established a trust fund, transferred my assets offshore, and created a contingency plan in case things went wrong. I knew they were ruthless, vindictive, and capable of anything. I couldn't afford to underestimate them. The key to my success was anonymity. I didn't want them to know that I was behind it all, not until it was too late. I used aliases, proxies, and intermediaries to conceal my identity and to distance myself from the operation. I wanted them to suffer the consequences of their actions without ever knowing who was responsible. It was the ultimate form of revenge. The truth would be my weapon. As the day of reckoning approached, I felt a strange mixture of excitement and trepidation. I had invested so much time, energy, and resources into this plan. There was no turning back now. I rehearsed every step, anticipated every contingency, and prepared myself for any eventuality. I knew that the consequences would be far-reaching, that lives would be changed forever. But I also knew that it was necessary, that it was the only way to break free from their control and to reclaim my own sense of self-worth. I was no longer the broken, defeated woman they had tried to create. I was a warrior, a strategist, a force to be reckoned with, and I was about to unleash hell on them. The exact day they tried to end me, I exposed the truth. I knew their weakness. It wasn't just arrogance, it was their insatiable need for validation. My brother Ethan craved the spotlight, the accolades, the admiration of his peers. My father, on the other hand, lusted after power, control, and the respect of the business world. I would use these desires against them, baiting them into a trap they couldn't resist. The first step was to leak carefully curated snippets of information to the press, hinting at the financial irregularities within Ethan's company. I made sure the information was vague enough to pique their interest but not so specific that it could be easily traced back to me. The media ate it up, publishing articles questioning Ethan's business practices and demanding greater transparency. He panicked, lashing out at his employees, tightening security, and desperately trying to plug the leaks. But the more he tried to control the situation, the more out of control it became. I watched with satisfaction as his carefully constructed image began to crumble before my eyes. Next, I turned my attention to my father. I knew that he was planning a major business deal, a merger that would solidify his position as one of the most powerful men in the industry. I also knew that the deal was contingent on certain financial projections that I knew to be based on fabricated data. I leaked the real data to a rival company, knowing that they would use it to undermine the merger and destroy my father's reputation. The rival company pounced, exposing the falsehoods and accusing my father of fraud. The deal collapsed, his stock price plummeted, and his credibility was shattered. He was furious, vowing to exact revenge on whoever had betrayed him. With Ethan and my father reeling, I decided it was time for the final act. I orchestrated a meeting, a family summit under the guise of reconciliation. I invited them to a neutral location, a secluded estate in the countryside, promising to lay aside our differences and to work towards a resolution. They were hesitant at first, suspicious of my motives, but their egos got the better of them. They couldn't resist the opportunity to gloat, to assert their dominance, to finally crush me once and for all. They arrived at the estate radiating arrogance and self-assurance. They were convinced that they had won, that I was finally ready to surrender, but they were wrong. I greeted them with a smile, offering them drinks and leading them into a lavishly decorated living room. We exchanged pleasantries, the tension in the air thick enough to cut with a knife. Then I dropped the bomb. I told them that I knew everything, that I had been investigating them for months, that I had gathered irrefutable evidence of their crimes. I presented them with the documents, the recordings, the photographs, all neatly organized and meticulously documented. Their faces paled, their eyes widened in disbelief, their arrogance evaporated. They tried to deny it, to deflect, to blame others, but it was no use. The evidence was overwhelming. I had them cornered. Then I revealed the final twist. I told them that I had not only gathered evidence of their past wrongdoings, but that I had also uncovered their latest scheme, a plan to defraud investors out of millions of dollars. I explained that I had already alerted the authorities and that they were on their way to arrest them. Panic set in. Ethan started screaming, accusing me of betrayal, threatening to ruin my life. My father remained silent, his face a mask of cold fury. He knew that he was defeated. He knew that his empire was about to crumble. Suddenly, the lights went out, the room was plunged into darkness. A blood-curdling scream echoed through the house, then silence. My heart pounded in my chest. Had they figured out my plan? Had they turned the tables on me? I fumbled for my phone, trying to turn on the flashlight, but it was dead. I was trapped in the dark, alone with my enemies, not knowing what was about to happen. The floorboards creaked. Someone was moving in the shadows. I held my breath, waiting for the inevitable. This was it. This was the moment of truth, the moment where everything would be decided, the moment. The darkness held for an eternity. Then a single spotlight illuminated the room, not a light switch but a projector whirring to life. The blood-curdling scream was a sound effect pre-recorded. On the wall behind them, their sins flashed in high definition. Every shady deal, every lie, every betrayal magnified and exposed for all the world to see, or at least for them to see in their final moments of dominance. The projector displayed surveillance footage, crystal clear recordings of their most private conversations, incriminating emails blown up on screen, financial documents detailing their illicit activities. Their faces contorted, a horrifying mix of shock, rage, and utter defeat. Ethan lunged forward, attempting to rip the projector from its stand, but a silent alarm had already been triggered. Within seconds, the estate was surrounded, not by hired goons, but by law enforcement. I had given them everything they needed. Dates, times, locations, they were meticulous. I knew that was their weakness. They valued power, I took it away. The sound of sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. The authorities stormed the building, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Ethan and my father were apprehended, wrestled to the ground, and placed in restraints. Their empire had crumbled, their carefully constructed facade shattered, their freedom gone. As they were led away in handcuffs, their eyes met mine. My father's gaze was filled with a chilling mixture of hatred and disbelief. Ethan's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He screamed obscenities, vowing revenge, promising to make me pay for what I had done. I simply stared back at them, my expression unwavering, my heart filled with a sense of cold, detached satisfaction. They lost everything, I just smiled. The news spread like wildfire. The media went into a frenzy, devouring every detail of the story. Ethan's company collapsed, his investors abandoned him, and his reputation was ruined beyond repair. My father was stripped of his power, his wealth was seized, and he faced a long prison sentence. Their names became synonymous with greed, corruption, and deceit. They were pariahs shunned by society, their legacy forever tarnished. I watched it all unfold from a distance, hidden from the spotlight, shielded from their wrath. I had achieved my goal. I had brought them to justice. The weight of their sins now rested squarely on their shoulders. The following months were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media coverage, and public scrutiny. I cooperated fully with the authorities, providing them with all the evidence I had gathered. I testified in court calmly and confidently recounting the events that had led to their downfall. I refused to be intimidated, to be silenced, or to be swayed by their attempts to manipulate the narrative. I spoke the truth, and the truth prevailed. In the end, they were convicted of numerous crimes, including fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. They were sentenced to lengthy prison terms, their lives effectively over. I didn't attend their sentencing. I didn't need to witness their final humiliation. I knew that they had already suffered enough. Their greatest punishment was the knowledge that they had destroyed themselves. The world now saw them for who they truly were, not powerful figures, but criminals. I moved on with my life, leaving the past behind me. I started a new business, a venture dedicated to helping victims of corporate fraud and abuse. I used my experiences to empower others to fight for justice and to hold those in power accountable. I became a symbol of hope, a beacon of light in a world often shrouded in darkness. The anger that had once consumed me faded away, replaced by a sense of purpose and fulfillment. I never forgot what they had done to me, but I refused to let it define me. I had emerged from the ashes, stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. The darkness had tried to swallow me whole, but I had refused to surrender. I had reclaimed my life, my power, and my dignity. Looking back, I don't regret my actions. I did what I had to do to protect myself, to seek justice, and to reclaim my life. It was a long, difficult, and dangerous path, but it was worth it. I learned valuable lessons about betrayal, resilience, and the power of forgiveness. I discovered my own strength, my own courage, and my own capacity for compassion. Revenge isn't sweet, it's necessary. It's a bitter pill to swallow, but sometimes it's the only medicine that can cure a broken soul. It was a chapter closed, a lesson learned, and a new beginning embraced. The scars may remain, but they serve as a reminder of the battles I have fought and the victories I have won. I am a survivor, a warrior, and a testament to the power of the human spirit. The cycle of abuse stops here. Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more justice.